All right, let's get started. So I'm going to be talking to you today about becoming a superhero with a compass. So my name is David Smith. Many of you may know me as _David Smith. I make apps. That's what I do. I imagine that's what many of you do. But rather than just making a few, I make lots of apps. No, seriously, I make way too many apps. This is a problem. Over the last 7 years, I've basically been in the App Store since it started. I've launched something like 52 unique app concepts into the App Store. And as a result of that, I've failed more times than most people have probably tried, and succeeded enough times to be able to continue doing this as a profession. And through that process, I've learned a few things. I've made so many mistakes. I've made many mistakes twice. And my hope in my talk today is to share with you some of the lessons I've found that are things that I've found that really help me make my business what it is now, and to help it get to the point that it's able to be successful, to be able to meet the goals that I have for it, and hopefully that will be helpful for you. Because the funny thing about business is that there's no formula for success. If I were to come up onto this stage and just start telling you, here's the 7 ways to surefire, supercharge your business, then I would almost certainly be being dishonest at best and just a liar at worst. This business is complicated. We are all coming at our businesses from different perspectives. We have different goals, we have different experiences, we have different talents. We are just different people in different environments. And so there's no formula for business that'll make, that I could say that would make, if you did this, it would work. The best thing we can do is to just try and optimize our chances for being successful. And so that's what I'm going to be trying to hit on today. The thing I love about a conference, about deciding to come and take a few days out of my normal work schedule, is that it gives me an opportunity for honesty and introspection. In the day-to-day work of what we do, it's so easy to fall into bad habits. It's so easy to not be conscious about the choices that we're making and how those choices are affecting our business and our work. And so what I loved about coming to a conference, and especially a conference like this that's focused around the business of independent software development, is that it gives us an opportunity for honest introspection. And more often than not, if I look back on my business and how it's grown, the times that I was able to be really honest with myself, not to be just sort of blinded by things that aren't really the reality about myself, about who I am and about what I want, that's the time when I'm able to make real progress on my work. And so I would encourage you, hopefully you've been doing it the last few days, but even in our last day and on the way home, when you're going home after this conference, to make sure that you're taking the questions that are being posed to you by myself and by the other speakers, and thinking about ways how you could actually apply them. Because the way that I'm going to be structuring my talk is I'm going to be asking you 2 questions. And they're 2 questions that are fairly superficially straightforward, but they're 2 questions that if you don't have a good answer for, that I think your business is going to be struggling as a result, or at least not as optimized as it could be. And those questions are around, what's your superpower, and where does your compass point? And those are intentionally vague because I want you to pay attention to the rest of the talk. The funny thing about business is there's often these patterns and these habits that you can get into where you can fall into traps. And the worst kind of trap is the trap that you're not aware that you're in until you've been in there for a long time. And you have a much greater distance that you have to dig yourself out of. And so my goal today is to talk to you about 2 traps that I have fallen into time and time again. Patterns that I found myself in that in retrospect were really problematic, that really hindered my ability for my business to grow, and it made it really difficult for me to realize why I was struggling so much. And the 2 traps that I'm going to be talking about are the trap of imitation and the trap of having an undefined success. Because the funny thing about business, and especially independent businesses, where we're small, we don't have massive resources, we're not a big corporation, we have very limited resources. And so in order for our businesses to succeed, we have to avoid the traps that we can fall into, and we need to make sure that we're taking advantage of every opportunity to leverage our effort. Because the traps that we can find ourselves falling into are friction. These are the things that are slowing us down and taking the energy that we're wanting to be putting into our work and making it productive and taking that and turning it into something else, right? It's like if you run sandpaper on something, the energy that you're putting to run that sandpaper across the wood, a lot of it's being turned into heat. And that heat is not actually what you're trying to do. That's the friction on your business that is really counterproductive. We want to make sure we're minimizing that we're aware of the traps that are taking our energy and pouring it into another direction so that we can avoid that. And then on the flip side, anytime we have an opportunity for leverage, we want to make sure we're doing that. Because leverage is all about amplification. If you go all the way back to your high school physics class, you might remember where leverage isn't so much about increasing what you're putting down on the lever, but it's magnifying that force into a much greater impact on the other end. And so any opportunity we can have to think about our business, to structure our business, to align what we're doing, and maximize that energy is going to be something that we need to do in order for our business to thrive. Because like I said, we have limited resources. So we have to make sure that all of our energy is going to where we want it to go. We need to maximize using leverage to magnify what we already have. We can't get other things. All we have is what we are. So we need to make sure we're making sure that we're magnifying that as much as we can. And like I said, there's no formula for success. All we can do, I find, is that we can minimize the friction that our business is facing, and we can maximize the leverage that we're taking advantage of. And if we do those two things, we're going to be in good shape. And we're going to be in as best shape realistically as we can possibly be. So the first trap I want to talk about is the trap of imitation. So admiration is nice, right? When I look at someone else's work, I look at many of the people in this room's work, I look at it and I admire it. And I say, wow, they have made something that's really awesome. This is a beautiful app. It's really functional. The app icon is amazing. Their business model, awesome. I can look at someone's work and I can admire it. And that's nice. Like, that makes me feel good, right? And the next step that's sort of beyond admiration, you can start to get into aspiration. And this is really useful. Aspiration is when we look at someone else's work and we say, wow, that's really cool. I wish I could do that too. I wish I could make an app that was as rich and detailed as that. I wish I could make an icon as beautiful as that. I wish I could think of awesome business models like that. And that's useful. And it's useful because it's motivational, right? Aspiration is a motivational force around on us. And if you've been doing business for any amount of time, motivation can sometimes be the hardest thing to have and to keep in growing a business. Because it's tough. It is a hard thing to run a business by yourself or with a small group. There are a lot of challenges that you are going to face. And so anything that you can do to motivate yourself is good. So aspiring towards the examples that you admire is great. But where it gets dangerous is when you start to imitating someone. Right? Imitation is where you start to look at someone else's experience. You start looking at the outputs of their work, and you try to assume that you know how they got there. And you try and imitate that output. But the problem with imitation is that it lacks context. Like, if I'm just trying to be Panic, I'm probably unaware of all of the things that go into how they make software. Or I look at Apple, or I look at any of the companies that I might admire, that I might aspire to the quality of their work. If I try and imitate their work, though, I'm losing the context around what made them able to do that in the first place. And moreover, it's not personal to me. So the question I'm going to be now walking through is understanding your superpower. What makes you specially gifted? Because that's the thing that you need to focus on. That's what's going to allow you to actually get to those aspirational things, right? Imitation won't get you there. You need to be able to make sure you're getting there in your own way with your own skills. So what is a superpower, right? I mean, obviously I'm being a little bit silly with a big fancy word like that, but this is the way that I think about it. So we're probably all familiar with this. This is a bell curve. This is the way that talent, skill, anything in the world is probably distributed along one of these. And so on the y-axis, we have like the number of people who have a particular level of skill, and you can put any skill you want on the x-axis, right? And this is the distribution of people who have competency in that. And so there's some people who are kind of bad at something. There's a lot of people who are kind of good about something. They are sort of by definition average at something. You have a commensurate number of people on the other end who are great at something. And then the really interesting part, when you start to think about this, is all the way at the end, you have the exceptional people. And there's a vanishingly small number of people who are exceptional at whatever skill we're talking about. And this is the way that I tend to think about the world, that the world is one big bell curve, and where do I fall on it? And that was a trap, because I would start to think of the world as like, okay, I would say it's fair to say that I'm an above average developer. I'm not like an amazing developer, but I'm above average, maybe. I'm not that great of a designer. I'm really not. You've seen my icons, they're not very good. And I'm not really good at business. But maybe with some kind of, weighted averaging or something, I could say that overall, I'm about average. And for many years in my business, that's how I would think about myself. And that's how I would approach business. And I would think about things like, how would an average person with average set of skills do this thing? I was completely getting it wrong, though, because business is really complicated. The process of building software is really complicated. There is a whole wide range and constellation of things that go into this. And there's a million different bell curves that are actually being averaged together to get us there. And the trap that I found myself falling into is thinking of myself only as the averaged together form of that. Rather than doing what is actually powerful is when instead you focus on the one where you're exceptional, or the two where you're exceptional. Because every single one of us somewhere has some skill where we are really exceptional, where we have an ability, something comes so much more easy to us than it does to other people. And I'm sure you have one, because everyone I've ever known who I've talked to about this kind of a topic eventually is able to identify what that is for them. And you may not be aware of it. Once you are, it's a really powerful thing, because there is something that you can do that you are really exceptional at. Because the question is, what is your superpower, right? What is that thing that you can do that no one else can? Or that thing that comes so much more easy to you? The thing that you can do with so much little energy, so much little effort. But other people, it's really difficult. Now, it's a hard question to ask sometimes, because it forces you to actually be honest and introspective with yourself. And so the framework that I've found to really be helpful for asking yourself that question is I'm going to ask you two other questions, which is, I guess, the way these things work. If I were to ask you, what are you good at? I think most people can probably have an answer for that, or several answers for that, right? If I were to ask you, what are you good at? You could probably give me an answer. And then the follow-up question, as you're thinking right now even, what are you good at? If I were to ask you, what makes you good at it? Somewhere in that answer of the second question is your superpower. It's the thing that makes you good at the things that you do. Not necessarily what you're good at, because that's probably not all the way on the edge of the bell curve. What makes you good at it? What is the spark in you and the way you approach problems, the talents you have? What part of that makes you really good? And it's probably going to be unique to you, or at least it's going to be fairly unique. That's the nature of a bell curve, right? When you're all the way on the end, it's kind of lonely because it's exceptional. It really is something that is exceptional. But this is your unique edge. As you approach your business, this is the thing that is going to help you be successful. It's not generic advice. It's not generic in any way. It's something about you. And you need to find a way to use that in your business. Because if you're not, you're wasting one of your biggest opportunities for amplification and leverage. So I'm going to make it a little bit more concrete by talking a little bit briefly about what's mine. Obviously, the nature of these things is kind of unique to me. So this isn't helpful advice. I'm just hopefully to try and take you on a journey of something I realized about myself and how that's helped me in my business. And since it's a superpower, I guess you could imagine this as the origin story. This is the few pages in the beginning of the comic book where I go back and I realize this is where I discovered my superpower. And for me, I need to go all the way back to when I was 14. And I was in high school in Fairfax County in Virginia. And in Fairfax County, this is the grading rubric they have for grading you. And for working out what grades you get at the end of the year. You get a 94 to 100, you get an A. You get a 90 to a 93, you get a B+, 83 to 90 is a B, and so on, right? Like, this is just the way that they grade things. And throughout most of my life, I was always taught, and it was always sort of the way that I was supposed to think about these things, that the best grade you could get is 100%, right? Makes sense. That's the best possible score. And I remember when I was in about 10th grade, I realized that the way I saw the world was different than that. That when I saw this, I realized that 100% is not in no way the best score you can get. The best score you can get is a 93.5. That's how I see the world. I look at the world and I say, 100 is a waste of effort. A 93.5, I get the same A, but it took me the least amount of effort to get there. And that's how I got through high school. I got a lot of 93.5s, a lot of 93.7s. I was able to get good grades with less effort than a lot of my peers, which made them really upset, but that's how I saw the world. And in retrospect, that was my superpower. I'm really good at finding the point of diminishing returns. Or maybe you could say, I'm very good at being thoughtfully lazy. That's what I do. And I'm able to see that point and identify it in my work. And for me, that's a really powerful thing for making apps. As you can imagine, having a lot of apps, being aware of the point of diminishing returns is extraordinarily helpful when you're making an app. To know that how much effort do I need to put into this before my returns stop being as useful, right? And I can make apps constantly aware of this point. And for me, that's been really helpful. And the thing that I had to own, and the thing that I had to be honest with in myself, is that means that I'm going to make apps often counter to sort of like the Apple way, right? I'm not making the app that is ridiculously polished. I'm not making the 100% app. I had to understand that that's not me. If I'm imitating somebody who is really good at making that 100% app, and there are many of you in this room who your apps are at that level, and maybe that's your superpower is more in that direction. You love and delight in the details. You love getting every absolute thing right, and you're tirelessly will work on it until you get there. Like, that's awesome. That's who you are. But I had to understand and own that that wasn't who I am. I live at the point of diminishing returns, and I was okay with that once I was able to put that into terms like that, wrap my arms around it and say, how can I build a business based on who I am, rather than trying to be someone else? Then the question I would ask you is, are you using your superpower, right? Are you aligning and structuring your business in such a way that it's being taken advantage of? Because if you're not, you're wasting a tremendous opportunity. Are you trying to be somebody who you actually aren't? Because while it's lovely to aspire towards somebody, or when you see an example of someone else whose work you admire, or you're like, man, one day I wish I could be as successful as whoever they are, that can be nice and that could be useful. But are you building a business aligned to who you are and to your unique skills? All right. The next trap that I found myself falling into a lot was the concept of sort of undefined success. Because business is a really variable and complicated thing, right? We all came into, and I love coming to a conference like this where it's talking about the business of independent software creation as like the subtitle. Because I feel comfortable asking you questions like, why do you have a business? Or if you're starting out, why do you want to have a business? Why is this something that you want to do? Because there are a lot of reasons people get into business. But somewhere in the back of your mind, you have a goal, right? You have something that you're thinking about, why you want to leave your day job, why you don't want to just be an employee, why when you leave school, you want to go into your business with yourself rather than with someone else. Why do you want to do that? And most importantly, and if you take nothing else from my talk, I want you to think about this slide this week. What does success look like for you? Right? What would, down the road, success be to you? If you need to be able to put that into words, be able to wrap your arms around it and say, yes, if I get to this, I'm successful. And you want it to be a sentence, a nice, concise thing that you can wrap your arms around and say, yes, that's what success means. Because you can get into business for all kinds of things. Maybe you want money, maybe you want fame, maybe you want enjoyment or friendship, or you're doing it out of necessity. And there's all kinds of reasons that we can have for starting a business. And there all can be good reasons, or interesting reasons, or whatever. There's a lot of things that can go into it. But it's also really easy for us then to have an undefined sense of what success means and to just sort of be running around in circles. Because at the end of the day, you can really only have one goal. This is one of those things that it took me a long time to really wrap my head around. But once you're able to focus on, is really powerful. Because you can only have one goal, or maybe put another way, you can only have one priority, right? Then if you allow me to sort of paraphrase Merlin Mann for a minute here, like thinking you can have more than one priority in life or in business or anything is a bit like saying that you have two heads, right? It means you're either truly exceptional or exceptionally foolish. You can't have more than one thing that's the most important thing for you. That's the nature of a superlative. You can't be saying, I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I want them all the equal amount. You can only have one thing that's your focus. You can only have one thing that's your priority, that's your goal, that you're trying to drive your business towards. Because early on in my career, I've been doing this long enough that I can say things like, back in the day, I wanted it all. I wanted so many different things, right? I wanted to chase the concept of making one of these crazy $1 million apps, right? Where I would do this, I would just put this thing out on the store, it would zoom up the charts, and I'd be rich. That'd be awesome, right? And I wanted to be famous, right? I mean, who doesn't want to be famous? I wanted people to know who I was, right? I wanted to be respected. I want people to know who I was and respect me for the work I do. Sounds great. I wanted to make awesome stuff. That also sounds pretty good, right? Who doesn't want to make awesome stuff? I wanted to enjoy the process of what I did. Sounds good, right? I mean, I wanted to win an Apple Design Award. Who doesn't want one of those cool, glowing cubes? That's pretty cool, man. Right? And these are all good things. And I wanted them all. I wanted each of these parts of my business for my business. And it's possible that you might get more than one of them. I'm fortunate enough to say I have many of the parts of these things that are parts of my business these days. But the difficulty and the thing that was really adding friction onto my business was that I was trying to have them all at the same time. I was taking my attention and my effort, and I was putting them into all of them simultaneously. And I was spreading myself thinly, and I wasn't able to be focused and making real progress towards what my actual goal was. Because none of the things I just said are, if I'm honest with myself, are my definition of success. That's the funny thing about business. And business is really tough because we tend to try and think about business in a very linear fashion, right? But there's this starting point. This is the point where you file your paperwork with the government or whatever it is, you pay your money, you fill in your form, and now suddenly you're a business. And you're prepared for it. You've come to release notes, you've read some books, you listen to some podcasts, and you're like, I know this is going to be tough, but I know I can do it. And you got your backpack on, and you're thinking about all right, I'm going to go out on this journey. And you imagine it that there's this nice linear process that you will then work through, and then at the end, there'll be success. I used to love thinking about business in some ways as walking through a field or walking across a field. Then I'm starting over here, and across the field on the other way, it's a bit of a ways, but I can see it, is success. And I got a backpack full of all the things I've learned from my books, from my conferences, all my past experiences, and it's a bit heavy, but I'll be all right. And I know there's going to be some muddy patches. I might slip a few times, but the whole time I know where I'm going, and I just got to do the effort to get there. And that would be great, wouldn't it, if that was what business literally looked like. But business doesn't look like that. Business is complicated, right? Business is in no way linear. And worse than just not being linear, business more often than not involves thousands of tiny decisions, these little things that we have to do every single day that will be taking us either closer to or farther away from success for us. And rather than walking across a field, it's much more like we're deep inside a forest. And we're constantly finding ourselves at crossroads, where there's one path going one way and there's one path going another way. And this can be a big thing. This can be a big strategic decision that we're making for our business, or it can be a small little choice that we're making, just what feels like nothing at the time, but in retrospect can have a big impact. Because every single one of those decisions deep in this forest is either getting us closer to or farther from what our ultimate goal we want to come out on the other side of the forest to look like. We won't know until we're able to look back if we're actually getting there. And if you've ever walked through a forest, if you've ever done any kind of orienteering, you realize the thing that you need if you're in a situation like that, when you're deep in a forest and you can't see where you're trying to go, you need a compass, right? You need something that you can reliably look to that'll tell you, does this choice get me closer or farther away from where I want to go? And a compass is a funny thing. It only does one thing, right? A compass just points north. That's all it does. It's not interesting, it's not fancy, it just points north. But because it does one thing, and it does it reliably, it lets you navigate. And that's sort of the concept I'm trying to head towards with making sure that you have a very strongly and tightly defined definition of success. You need to be able to look at every choice you make in your business and say, will this get me closer to or farther away from what success means to me? But there's a funny thing, there's a strange truth about business that I've found, is that when I'm able to focus on one thing and put all my energy and my ability behind something, I actually increase my chances of getting the other things I might want. For all those other things about being, having success or being famous or being respected, a lot of those things tend to come around. And when I think of the people who I admire the most, it's almost always people who are able to put all of their energy and focus behind one thing. And so like I did with the superhero thing, I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about what it is for me. Right? It would be a bit unfair for me to ask you to think and define what success looks like for you in one sentence if I didn't have a good one myself. For me, success in my business is providing reliable income to my family. That's it. As long as I'm able to do that in an ethical way, I am successful. And I'm okay with that. And I'm okay with that meaning that I may never win an Apple Design Award. I'm okay with the fact that I may never be famous. I may never make a $1 million app. As long as my business can provide reliable income to my family, I'm happy. And the realization and being okay with that and being honest with myself about that has been really, really freeing and really, really powerful. Because I just need to think about my business in terms of sustainability. Every decision I make when I'm deep in that forest, trying to decide which way to go, I can just keep asking myself that question. Will this make my business more stable? Will this increase the sustainability and the reliability of the income my business can provide to my family? Right? So I think about a question like, should I make this app? Should I make another app? Well, I kind of spoiled the punchline on this one because clearly the answer is yes. I always will make the new app. But the reason for why I keep doing that, the reason why I have so many apps, is because when I pose that question is, would doing that make my business more stable? The answer is almost always yes, because it will. Having a wide variety of apps, having a lot of opportunity for success and failure, means that all my eggs are not in one basket. I can just, as one of my apps goes down, another one will come up. I can add a new one, another one will fall off. Overall, I've had a tremendously reliable income for my business, which is a lovely thing to say, and I'm really, really proud of having gotten there. But most of it is because this is how I frame my business. This is how I think about it. That as the App Store has had some pretty crazy ups and downs, in many ways my income has not changed very much. And that's kind of nice. I like that my income is reliable and dependable. I don't have these huge spikes and these massive troughs. Like, my income is boring. And I want that because that's my definition of success. Or maybe another part of my business where I'm trying to make a decision, right? I think about some kind of monetization strategy. And I know it's so easy for us often to start to think about these in these kind of like highfalutin, fancy terms, like, I don't know, seems like paid software really makes sure that we're valuing the intrinsic value of what we do and the craftsmanship that goes into it and all these kind of fancy sounding terms, right? I've monetized my apps every way you could imagine. Like, if you can come up with something else, I would really love to try it. But I probably have already tried it, and it may or may not have worked. Because I've done everything. I've had paid apps, I've had free apps, I've had advertising-based, in-app purchase, I've had subscriptions, patronage, everything. I keep trying it. And the reason why I'm happy to try anything is because when I pose that question through the filter of, would it make my business more stable? The answer is probably yes, right? If I get business from 5 or 6 different sources in 6 different ways, I'm much more able to weather the storms of the App Store going up and down. And since my definition of success is just reliable income, I'm all up for it. And this one is even another interesting combination because it combines my superpower as well as my definition of success. When I look at an app and I start to say, should I add this feature? Would doing this make my business more stable? Would it make my business more stable to add this feature? And often I find myself saying, you know what? Probably wouldn't. That effort is probably better spent somewhere else. That would actually make my business more stable. Having a wider thing, rather like being a mile wide rather than a mile deep. And that has been freeing for me to be able to be honest with myself and be okay with that. Because it's so easy to look at these things and to try and imitate other people's experience. And that can lead to trouble. Because the reality is all of us are deep in that forest, right? We are all in a place where we cannot see the future. We cannot see the impact that the choices that we're making now are going to have down the road. That's just the reality of life. But all we can do is try and make choices to to make sure that we're not going to get lost. And the only way that I've found to be able to reliably do that is to make sure that we have a singular focus, that we have a single, concise definition of success, and we can take that and to apply it to all the choices that we have to make in our business. Because I need you to understand that you need to have one thing that would mean success to you. If I came up to you in a few hours after you've had a time to think about this and I asked you, what does success mean to you? You should have a simple answer. Because if it isn't a simple answer, if it isn't concise, you're almost certainly going to be taking your energy and pouring it into multiple directions that ultimately aren't getting you closer to your definition of success. That's just the nature of that. But once you're able to find this thing, when you have the one thing that would mean success to you, the great thing is that you can then do it. You can do that. You can focus and align your business towards that. You can focus on building that business that will achieve that goal. And you need to let go of the other dreams, of the other things that you kind of like would be nice to have, but aren't part of that goal. But when you're able to let go of that, it's tremendously freeing and empowering for you to actually get where you want to go. Because being an independent software owner is a funny thing, right? Being an indie is very much a mixed blessing. We have the tremendous flexibility and the tremendous opportunity to structure our day's work, to structure our business, to choose what it is that we do. We can define and direct that however we want. That's up to us. We're independent. There's not a boss telling us how to do things. We can structure our business. We can choose the market we go into. We can choose the approach we take. That's wonderful. That's the awesome thing. The curse of being an indie, though, is that we have tremendously limited resources. For many of us, our only resource, in many ways, is us and our time. We only have so many hours in a day. We only have so much cognitive energy that we can pour into our work. We have to make sure that work and that energy are going in the direction that is going to be most effective. Because if we don't, there's no way we're going to compete with an organization with a lot of resources. They can just throw people at the problem. We have to throw our limited energy, leverage in the right direction in order for us to even have a chance of being successful. Right? You have to build your business. I can't tell you what your business will look like. You each have different goals. We all have different backgrounds. We're all different people. But you have the tremendous opportunity by being independent of building your business that achieve your goals in the way that you're uniquely gifted to achieve. Right? You each have a unique set of skills. Unique to you based on your education, your experience, your personality, who you are, your background, your family, whoever. There's so many parts that go into making you, you. And one of those is probably you are able to do at an exceptional level. And when you're able to identify that, your unique skill, and then you can focus that towards your own definition of success, you're able to do some really powerful work. When you're able to take all of your energy, all of your focus, and point it at the same thing, you make a lot more progress. Because the thing that I have found that is most true across all the independents that I've known is that people who are able to find the intersection of their unique abilities and their focused attention, that intersection point is where we are able to do our most powerful work. And I imagine that's what we all want to do, right? We all want to do the work that we feel most empowered by doing. So you need to find that point. You need to think about what makes you, you. What's your superpower? And then where should you point your focused attention towards? Where does your compass point? What does success look like for you? Thank you.